Hey everyone, we've been making our way through Deuteronomy, and the format is that I read through a chapter at a time, and after each chapter we look at what John Wesley had to say in his notes on the Old Testament. I think that's all there is to be said. So we're beginning at Deuteronomy chapter 12. Listen again to the Word of God. These are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land which the Lord God of thy fathers giveth thee to possess it all the days that ye live upon the earth. Ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess served their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree. And ye shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. And ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. Ye shall not do so unto the Lord your God. But unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. And thither ye shall bring your burnt offerings, and your sacrifices, and your tithes, and heave offerings of your hand, and your vows, and your freewill offerings, and the firstlings of your herds and of your flocks. And there ye shall eat before the Lord your God, and ye shall rejoice in all that ye put your hand unto, ye and your households, wherein the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. Ye shall not do after all the things that we do here this day, every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. For ye are not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance which the Lord your God giveth you. But when ye go over Jordan, and dwell in the land which the Lord your God giveth you to inherit, and when he giveth you rest from all your enemies round about you, so that ye dwell in safety, then there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Thither shall ye bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which ye vow unto the Lord. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God, ye and your sons and your daughters and your men servants and your maid servants, and the Levite that is within your gates, for as much as he hath no part nor inheritance with you. Take heed to thyself that thou offer not thy burnt offerings in every place that thou seest, but in the place which the Lord shall choose in one of thy tribes. There thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, and there thou shalt do all that I command thee. Notwithstanding thou mayest kill and eat flesh in all thy gates, whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, according to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee. The unclean and the clean may eat thereof, as of the roebuck and as of the hart. Only ye shall not eat the blood, ye shall pour it upon the earth as water. Thou mayest not eat within thy gates the tithe of thy corn, or of thy wine, or of thy oil, or the firstlings of thy herds, or of thy flock, nor any of thy vows which thou vowest, nor thy freewill offerings, or heave offering of thine hand. But thou must eat them before the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant, and the Levite that is within thy gates. And thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God in all that thou puttest thine hands unto. Take heed to thyself that thou forsake not the Levite as long as thou livest upon the earth. When the Lord thy God shall enlarge thy border as he hath promised thee, and thou shalt say, I will eat flesh, because thy soul longeth to eat flesh. Thou mayest eat flesh, whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. If the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to put his name there be too far from thee, then thou shalt kill of thy herd and of thy flock, which the Lord hath given thee, as I have commanded thee, and thou shalt eat in thy gates whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. Even as the roebuck and the hart is eaten, H-A-R-T, so thou shalt eat them. The unclean and the clean shall eat of them alike. Only be sure that thou eat not the blood, for the blood is the life, and thou mayest not eat the life with the flesh. Thou shalt not eat it, thou shalt pour it upon the earth as water. Thou shalt not eat it, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. Only thy holy things which thou hast and thy vows thou shalt take, and go unto the place which the Lord shall choose. And thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and the blood of thy sacrifices shall be poured out upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and thou shalt eat the flesh. Observe and hear all these words which I command thee, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee forever, when thou doest that which is good and right in the sight of the Lord thy God. When the Lord thy God shall cut off the nations from before thee, whither thou goest to possess them, and thou succeedest them, and dwellest in their land. Take heed to thyself that thou be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. Thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hateth have they done unto their gods, for even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. Thus ends chapter 12. Okay, so the format, the way Mr. Wesley breaks this down, begins a command to destroy all relics of idolatry, verses 1 through 3. Relic is spelled R-E-L-I-C-K. How interesting. Then to worship God in his own place and according to his own appointment, verses 4 through 14. A permission to eat flesh but not blood in verse 15 and 16. Directions to eat the tithe in the holy place and to take care of the Levite, verses 17 through 19. A farther permission to eat flesh but not blood in verses 20 through 25. A direction to eat holy things in the holy place in verses 26 through 28. And then farther cautions against idolatry in verses 29 through 32. All right, so the first note he has is in verse 2 with the phrase, all the places. And the quote is, ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess served their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree. So Mr. Wesley says these are temples, chapels, altars, groves, as appears from other scriptures. It also talks about how it's under every green tree. As the Gentiles consecrated diverse trees to their false gods, so they worshipped these under them. I'm sure somebody's done some really interesting research on ancient Near Eastern pagan religion. In verse 3, it talks about pillars, quote, and ye shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. Pillars are things upon which their images were set, the images of idols, I guess. It also talks about names, and you shall hew down the graven images of their gods and destroy the names of them out of that place. How do you destroy a name? That is, all the memorials of them and the very names given to the places from the idols. So, yeah, they do come in and find cities that are named after idols, which they then take possession of and rename. And there are also place markers and stuff. In verse 4, the phrase, not do so. The quote is, ye shall not do so unto the Lord your God. Not do so, that is, not worship him in several places, mountains, and groves. So it's not, okay, so one would assume maybe it's saying don't destroy God's holy places. Here what Mr. Wesley is saying is don't make a ton of holy places for the Lord. There are only a few places that are acceptable. Verse 5, the quote, to put his name there, comes from, but unto the place where the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. That is, to set up his worship there, and which he shall call by his name as his house or his dwelling place, namely, where the ark of the covenant should be, the tabernacle or temple, which was first at Shiloh, then Jerusalem. There is not one precept in all the law of Moses so largely inculcated as this, to bring all their sacrifices to that one altar. And how significant is that appointment? They must keep to one place in token of their belief that there is one God and one mediator between God and man. It not only served to keep up the notion of the unity of the Godhead, but the one only way of approach to God and communion with him in and by his Son. So here what he argues is that there was only one acceptable place in all the world to worship the Lord, and that's wherever the Ark of the Covenant was. And first it was kept always with the tabernacle, but then eventually Solomon built a temple for the Lord, and that's where the Ark stayed for a couple centuries. In verse 6, there's a phrase, thither bring your burnt offerings. So here's the full verse. And thither ye shall bring your burnt offerings, and your sacrifices, and your tithes, and heave offerings of your hand, and your vows, and your freewill offerings, and the firstlings of your herd and of your flocks. So these were wisely appropriated to that one place for the security of the true religion and for the prevention of idolatry and superstition, which might otherwise more easily have crept in, and to signify that their sacrifices were not accepted for their own worth, but by God's gracious appointment, and for the sake of God's altar, by which they were sanctified, and for the sake of Christ, whom the altar manifestly represented. Hey, that's quite a thing to say. Hadn't heard that before. So the first concern is that humans are prone to heresy and to get away from the central point of the truth. So it's saying you got to take it to this one place where the Levites are in charge, and they're going to make sure that you don't fall into any kind of heresy. So it talked about burnt offerings. It also talked about heave offerings, that is, your first fruits of corn and wine and oil and other fruits. And these are called heave offerings of their hand, because the offerer was first to take these into his hands and to heave them before the Lord, and then to give them to the priest. I'm embarrassed I didn't know that. And then there's your free will offerings. Even your voluntary oblations. Oblations are outpourings, which were not due by my prescription, but only by your choice. You may choose what kind of offering you please to offer, but not the place where you shall offer them. So free will offerings are things that are not stipulated. It's just out of the great gladness of your heart, you go and offer them to the Lord. All right, in verse 7, and there ye shall eat before the Lord your God. Not in the most holy place, Mr. Wesley says, wherein only the priests might eat, but in the places allowed to the people for this in the holy city. So, and there ye shall eat before the Lord your God. This is after the meat has been sacrificed and cooked a bit. And ye shall rejoice in all that ye put your hand unto, ye and your households, wherein the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. So, ye shall eat. You're part of the things mentioned. So not everything. You don't get to eat everything. There's some designated to the priests, and then there's some that usually gets burned up. Before the Lord, in that context, means in the place of God's presence, where God's sanctuary shall be. So within the tabernacle and within the temple, there's a place called the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, and only the high priest was allowed in there. And then there was a holy place outside of that where only the priests were allowed. And then outside of that is where the altar was, and that's where the general public was allowed. And that was also considered a holy place, and is someplace around there that the public was allowed to eat the meat. Or probably further out. There's especially temple courts later. It became a big area. All right, in verse 8, quote, ye shall not do after all the things that we do here this day, every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. So what does he mean by here? Where the inconveniency of the place and the uncertainty of our abode would not permit exact order in sacrifices and feasts and ceremonies, which therefore God was then pleased to dispense with. But saith he will not do so there, right in his own eyes. He says, you're doing right in your own eyes. Not that universal liberty was given to all persons to worship how they listed, but in many things their unsettled condition gave opportunity to do so. So once again, that was verse 8. You shall not do after all the things that we do here this day. Every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. Mr. Wesley's pretty sure that they've been given license to be a little more free form in the wilderness, and that as they go into the promised land, that liberty is going to dissipate, that they're going to need to be more strict about it. Verse 11, it talks about his name. Quote, then there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. When it talks about that, his majesty and glory, says Mr. Wesley, his worship and service, his special and gracious presence. I'm not sure that really gets the fullness of the name. But let's go on. That's verse 11. It keeps on going. He's got a couple other notes. Thither shall you bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which you vow unto the Lord. So when it's talking about your choice vows, the Hebrew is the choice of your vows. That is, your select or chosen vows. So called because things offered for vows were to be perfect, whereas defective creatures were accepted in free will offerings. So there was already law stipulated with respect to when someone would vow a vow to the Lord, and then I guess in order to consecrate that vow or initiate it, there had to be a sacrifice, and that sacrifice could never be a blemished piece of livestock. It always had to be a pure and undefiled piece of livestock. But then Mr. Wesley's clear free will offerings can be members of your herd that are not, that are blemished. All right, in verse 12 it talks about your daughters. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God, ye and your sons and your daughters and your different kinds of servants. Hence it appears that though the males only were obliged to appear before God in their solemn feasts, yet the women were also permitted to come. How nice. Verse 13, it talks about burnt offerings. Quote, take heed to thyself that thou offer not thy burnt offerings in every place that thou seest. Nor the other things mentioned above, this one and most eminent kind being put for all the rest. Okay. In verse 17, it talks about within thy gates. Quote, thou mayest not eat within thy gates the tithe of thy corn, or of thy wine, or of thy oil, or the firstlings of thy herds, or of thy flock, nor any of thy vows which thou vowest, nor the free will offerings or heave offering of thine hand. So that is to say, you may not eat these things in your private habitations, here opposed to the place of God's worship. In verse 20, it talks about enlarging thy border. Quote, when the Lord thy God shall enlarge thy border, as he hath promised thee, and thou shalt say, I will eat flesh, because thy soul longeth to eat flesh, thou mayest eat flesh, whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. When it talks about enlarging the border, which will make it impossible to bring all the cattle thou usest to the tabernacle. So as the geographical area gets bigger, getting sacrifices to the temple or tabernacle becomes impractical. Within the days of Jesus, that's why they had money changers at the temple and people selling doves and other animals that you could purchase to sacrifice, because it was just easier and more feasible to buy your livestock in Jerusalem than to take it 100, 200, 300 miles to get there. Verse 21, If the place be too far, that's what we're talking about right now. If the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to put his name there be too far from thee, then thou shalt kill thy herd and of thy flock, which the Lord hath given thee, as I have commanded thee, and thou shalt eat in thy gates whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. So if the place be too far, being obliged to carry their sacrifices to the place of worship, they might think themselves obliged to carry their other cattle thither to be killed. They are therefore released from all such obligations, and left at liberty to kill them at home, whether they lived nearer that place or farther from it. Only the latter is here mentioned as being the matter of the scruple. Quote, as I have commanded means in such a matter as the blood may be poured forth. So what Mr. Wesley seems to understand is there are only a few special offerings that can only and ever be offered at the temple or in the tabernacle. But then other times that you want to eat meat, it doesn't have to be a temple or tabernacle offering. It can just be something that you butcher correctly in your own place and you don't eat the blood. Yeah, the non-negotiable piece is not eating the blood. And if anybody's read Acts of the Apostles, you know this is one of the only stipulations that the Jewish Christians hold on to for imposing upon the new Gentile Christians, that they cannot eat blood. So even though they can eat unclean animals, they can't eat blood ever, because the blood is the life. It's still wrong. It's still wrong today. It's never canceled in the Bible. All right, in verse 22, it talks about the roebuck. Quote, even as the roebuck and the hart is eaten, so thou shalt eat them. The unclean and the clean shall eat of them alike. As common or unhallowed food, though they be the same kind with the sacrifices which are offered to God. When it talks about the unclean, because there was no holiness in such meat for which the unclean might be excluded from it. You know, I honestly can't say that I understand this. I've read Jewish kosher law. Even as a roebuck in the heart is eaten, so shalt thou. I don't think it's giving them permission to eat unclean food. But I really don't know what it's saying here. I don't know what Mr. Wesley's saying here. So let's go on. In verse 27, he talks about the flesh, quote, and thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and the blood of thy sacrifices shall be poured out upon the altar of the Lord thy God, and thou shalt eat the flesh. So when it's talking about the flesh, accepting what shall be burned to God's honor and given to the priest according to his appointment. So, yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. It's not every single piece of meat gets eaten. Some of it gets burned up to the Lord for his glory or to please him. And then some is given to the Levites who perform the sacrifice, and then you get the leftovers. All right, the final phrase from this chapter is in verse 30, quote, by following them. So here's the verse. Take heed to thyself that thou be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. So when it says, take heed not to be snared by following them, by following the example they left when their persons are destroyed. So God's going to destroy these locals, and the Hebrews are going to move in, but then the Hebrews should not take an interest in the religion of those whom they chased out. Which might sound ridiculous to people, but think about how many people are interested in Native American religion, you know? And it's not that the Native Americans were wicked and they were driven out by the manifest destiny of the white race, but it's just to say, when there's a displaced population, we don't necessarily assume that there was something wrong with their gods. So there's just an interest in what were these people about. Even after they're gone, we just want to know. And here he's saying, you know, really don't take an interest in them. Don't follow what they were about, because it's idolatry. All right, in chapter 13, here we go, the next chapter. If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass, whereof he spake unto thee, saying, let us go down let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them. Thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet, or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God proveth you to know whether ye love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Ye shall walk after the Lord your God, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and ye shall serve him, and cleave unto him. And that prophet, or that dreamer of dreams, shall be put to death, because he hath spoken to turn you away from the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt, and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to thrust thee out of the way which the Lord thy God commanded thee to walk in. So shalt thou put the evil away from the midst of thee. If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is at thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, Let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely, of the gods of the people which are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him. Neither shall thine eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him. But thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. And thou shalt stone him with stones that he die, because he hath sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and shall do no more any such wickedness as this is among you. If thou shalt say in one of thy cities, which the Lord thy God hath given thee to dwell there, saying, Certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you, and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their cities, saying, Let us go down and serve other gods, which ye have not known. Then shalt thou inquire, and make search, and ask diligently, and behold, if it be truth, and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought among you, thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly, and all that is therein, and the cattle thereof, with the edge of the sword. And thou shalt gather all the spoil of it into the midst of the street thereof, and shalt burn with fire the city, and all the spoil thereof, every whit, for the Lord thy God. And it shall be a heap forever. It shall not be built again. And there shall cleave not of the cursed thing to thine hand, that the Lord may turn from the fierceness of his anger, and show thee mercy, and have compassion upon thee, and multiply thee, as he hath sworn unto thy fathers, when thou shalt hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep all his commandments which I command thee this day, to do that which is right in the eyes of the Lord thy God. Thus ends the reading of the 13th chapter. The way Wesley breaks this up. The first section is enticers to idolatry to be stoned in verses 1 through 11. And then idolatrous cities to be entirely destroyed in verses 12 through 18. So the first guy he picks on is a dreamer of dreams, and that's in verse 1. If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder. I never connected this before, but in Jude, it talks against dreamers. Similar concept. One that pretends God hath revealed himself to him by visions or dreams, giveth a sign or wonder. If they come and giveth thee a sign or a wonder, that is, shall foretell some strange and wonderful thing. And if it happens, verse 3, thou shalt not hearken to that prophet. Thou shalt not hearken to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God proveth you to know whether ye love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So, you shall not listen to that prophet. You shall not receive his doctrine. Doctrine just means teaching. Though the sign come to pass. So even if it's a correct prophecy, if they're trying to take you to a different God, don't listen to them. Don't receive his doctrine. For although when such a sign or wonder foretold did not follow or come to pass, it was a sign of a false prophet. Yet when it did come to pass, it was no sufficient sign of a true one, especially in such a case. So Wesley's making clear here, it matters if someone's prophecy comes true. If someone makes a prophecy or has a vision and it doesn't come to pass, that's a false prophet. But just because it does come to pass doesn't mean they're a true prophet. It's actually more difficult than that. There are many things which may be wrought by evil spirits, God so permitting it for wise and just reasons, not only for the trial of the good, but also for the punishment of ungodly men. And when it says proveth you in verse 3, that the Lord your God proveth you, that is when he tries your faith and your love and obedience. Okay? To know whether you love the Lord your God. All right, he's proving you to know, namely, judicially or in a public manner, if you love him. So as both you and others may know and see it, that so the justice of the judgments upon you may be more evident and glorious. Why is that? God proveth you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart. He's saying this is in a public and judicial sense rather than some kind of internal sense. And I don't see why that would be, but I don't have to. All right, in verse 5, there's a question about to thrust. Quote, and that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he hath spoken to turn you away from the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to thrust thee out of the way which the Lord thy God commanded thee to walk in. So, this phrase means the great force and power of seducers to corrupt men's minds. Okay, so yeah, thrust is a strong word, and the notion here is that heresy is very powerful, and that people who advocate for heresy are very powerful. So, we look back on them and we think they're so stupid, but how many of us, if we have a good friend or someone says, oh, I heard about this great psychic and she can foretell all kinds of things, how many people have it in them to go, no, that's witchcraft. We shouldn't be a part of that at all. Or, what are those people that, mediums, a medium can supposedly have contact with the underworld and the dead or other deities. How many people have the integrity to say, no, that's idolatry. We should have nothing to do with that. We have our own common manifestations of it in our culture that seem innocuous and innocent. Back then, it was the same thing. It didn't seem like a big deal to worship other gods. All the people of that region worshipped many gods, and some of them were fun. They let you have illicit sex. There was alcohol and debauchery and partying. There was feasting. Anyway, we're going to get to that more. But anyway, it's very persuasive when someone says, oh, it's no big deal and it's fun, and look, I had this vision and it'll be great. So shalt thou put the evil away. In verse 5, quote, so shalt thou put the evil away from the midst of thee. So it just said you should put him to death, right? Thou shalt remove the guilt by removing the guilty. So, how we have that saying, hate the sin but love the sinner? Here it's hate the sin and kill the sinner. That's exactly what it's saying. Okay, verse 6, the son of thy mother, quote, if thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of close relations. This is added to restrain the signification of the word brother, which is often used generally for one near akin, and to express the nearness of the relation, the mother's side being usually the ground of most fervent affection. So brother, it's like nowadays people say, oh, he's my cousin, even though it's not their cousin. They're just saying he's related to me, or I wish he was related to me. He's just my buddy. Anyway, so back then, if you said someone was your brother or your son, that didn't necessarily mean they were a biological relation. So someone trying to get out of this commandment could say, oh, well, I'm not going to kill my actual brother. Here God is talking about, someone close to me that I love a lot. He's not talking about my actual brother. And no, it's when it says the son of your mother, it's very clear. Like, even if this is your brother that you grew up with, if he does this, you got to kill him. And then thy daughter, thy piety must overcome both thy affection and thy compassion to the weaker sex. The father and mother are here omitted because they are sufficiently contained in the former examples. I don't know about that, John Wesley. What if they're not included? Because honor thy father and mother, that it may go with you in the land, is something that we're supposed to take seriously. And you can't honor your parents if you kill them. And John Wesley would say you shouldn't honor them if they're idolaters. But, what if God's not talking about it explicitly? Yeah, you shouldn't obey them, but you shouldn't kill your parents. I mean, you shouldn't kill your son or your daughter or your brother. But even so, anyway, why does he say that? All right, in verse 8, the phrase conceal him. Quote, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shall thine eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare him, neither shalt thou conceal him. Conceal means hide. That is, you shall not smother his fault, hide or protect his person, but shalt accuse him to the magistrate and demand justice upon him. Okay, so God knows how our hearts work. When we love somebody and they do wrong, we want to protect them. And here it's saying if they've done wrong by the Lord, not only do you not protect them, not only do you pretend you don't know about it or help them get away from it, but you're the one who gets them in trouble. If you hear about it, you're responsible. Verse 9, quote, thou shalt kill him, but thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him. Your hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. It's still talking about this close family relation, a brother, son, or daughter. If they have fallen into idolatry, if they're trying to entice you to stray away from the Lord. Now, let me be clear, in case somebody's joining for the first time. This isn't something that carries over into the new covenant with Jesus Christ. This is something pertaining to the Hebrews and the promised land and the culture of ancient Near Eastern religion. Our idolatry is more insidious and more pervasive. And within Ephesians, Paul is very clear that we now no longer kill sinners or people who offend the Lord. Our enemy is not against, our fight is not against flesh and blood, it's against the spiritual forces and powers. But in this context, it is saying your close relation, if they do wrong, you got to kill them. You have to do it. If you love the Lord, you have to kill them. Your hands need to be the first around their neck. Okay, so thou shalt kill him, not privately, which pretense would have opened the door to innumerable murders, but by procuring his death by the sentence of the magistrate. Thou shalt cast the first stone at him, as the witness was to do. So yeah, that makes sense, because in this very verse it says that there will be other hands to put their hands on it. So yeah, this is not a private thing where your daughter says, hey, let's go worship Ishtar, and you kill her privately in your own home. Rather, you as a witness publicly expose her. She has a trial, and then when she's sentenced to death by the city elders, it's your hand that first. Well, and yeah, I think it does say that they need to be stoned, so you cast the first stone, which is a phrase that Jesus deals with. All right, verse 13, there's a phrase, children of Belial. This isn't the last time we run into this, although I think it is the first time in the Bible. The quote was, certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which ye have not known. So, who are these children of Belial? It signifies properly persons without yoke. Yoke being something that constrains them. Y-O-K-E. Vile and wretched miscreants, lawless and rebellious, that will suffer no restraint, that neither fear God nor reverence man. That's what children of Belial are. They're antinomians. They're rebellious. They don't accept any limitation from self or others. It talks about from among you, quote, okay, so the children of Belial are gone out from among you. What's that mean? That is from your church and religion. It notes a separation from them, not in place, as appears by their partnership with their fellow citizens, both in sin and punishment, but in heart, doctrine, and worship. So when it says that they've gone out from among you, it doesn't mean that they left your town and they went somewhere else. It means that they left the Hebrew faith, which in the context makes sense, yeah. Verse 14, there's a question about the word inquire, and that verse was, Then shalt thou inquire and make search and ask diligently, and behold, if it be truth, and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought among you. So if you hear about a group of apostates who are trying to bring other people to another god, you got to inquire. This is meant of the magistrate, to whose office this properly belongs, and of whom he continues to speak in the same manner in verses 15 and 16 when he says thou. The Jewish writers say the defection of a city is to be tried by the great Sanhedrin. If it appear that they are thrust away to idolatry, they send 2 learned men to admonish them. If they repent, all is well. If not, all Israel must go up and execute this sentence. Though we do not find this law put in execution in all the history of the Jewish church, yet for neglecting the execution of it on inferior cities, God himself, by the army of the Chaldeans, executed it on Jerusalem, the head city, which was utterly destroyed and lay in ruins for 70 years. So here he lays out a process written out by the Jewish writers, and I don't know who he's talking about there. But the Sanhedrin are a ruling council of, well, I think it was just Jerusalem, but maybe it was for other big cities. But if they hear about these apostate other towns, then they send 2 of the representatives to go investigate it, give them a chance to repent, like the inquisitors in Spain. And then if they don't repent, then all of Israel's supposed to come and kill them all. And he says, we don't know about that ever happening, but we know about God mobilizing other non-Jews to come in and do that for him. Also, this is the second time John Wesley used the word church. All church really means, it's the Greek word ekklesia, and it means assembly. So it's a religious body of believers united in a covenant with God. So no, the Church of Jesus Christ wasn't around back then. However, God's covenant people, the Jews, were, and they were functionally church and assembly. In verse 15, Wesley points to the phrase, the inhabitants, quote, thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly and all that is therein, and the cattle thereof with the edge of the sword. So when he says you got to kill all the inhabitants, namely all that are guilty, not the innocent part, such as disowned this apostasy, who doubtless by choice, at least upon warning, would come out of so wicked a place. So here's the concern with the cherem, the ban, the devotion to destruction. In other places, the Lord says, kill the women, kill the children, kill everybody in there, kill the animals, burn everything, destroy everything. He's saying that's not one of these, right? Right here, God's intention is not to wipe out the entire city, just the apostates within it. That'd be nice. I don't see the clues for that. Whenever it says we'll kill, destroying it utterly, I mean, that's the cherem, that's the word. So whenever utterly, the very same punishment which was inflicted upon the cities of the cursed Canaanites, to whom having made themselves equal in sin, it is but just God should equal them in punishment. Yeah, see, the fact that that's there, and it says, kill the cattle thereof with the edge of the sword, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't kill the whole city, but maybe there's a context clue I missed. In verse 16, there's the phrase, for the Lord, quote, and thou shalt gather all the spoil of it into the midst of the street thereof, and shalt burn with fire the city, and all the spoil thereof every whit, for the Lord thy God. For the satisfaction of God's justice, the maintenance of his honor and authority, and the pacification of his offended majesty. So yeah, that's what it means for the Lord. You're supposed to put everything in the streets and burn it for the Lord. And you could ask, well, how does that help the Lord? He has been insulted and offended and reviled by his own Hebrew people choosing another God. And so to exact justice upon them, they and all their stuff have to be destroyed. That's what makes it right with God. And it shall be a heap forever, it shall not be built again. It shall be an eternal monument of God's justice and terror to after ages. So, Jericho, I think, was supposed to be like this. Jericho, they they destroyed, and it wasn't supposed to be rebuilt, but it got rebuilt. We get there in the next book in Joshua. So yeah, those ruins are supposed to remain as evidence of God's judgment, to make people think twice before they decide to worship another god. Because ideally, you motivate people with the carrot and say, oh, God is so wonderful. But in the event that they're not motivated by the carrot, you need that stick. So they go, well, I'm not in the best place with God right now, but I'm not going to leave him because he does bad things to people who leave or never come. Verse 17, the phrase multiply thee, that was in, and there shall cleave not of the cursed thing to thine hand, that the Lord may turn from the fierceness of his anger and show thee mercy and have compassion on thee and multiply thee. What does multiply thee mean? So thou shalt have no loss of thy numbers by cutting off so many people. Saying God's going to kill your people if you go into idolatry or apostasy. And then it's also saying, I think that God will help you have more kids if you are faithful to him. I think we can do one more chapter. Chapter 14. Ye are the children of the Lord your God. Ye shall not cut yourselves, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself above all the nations that are upon the earth. Thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. These are the beasts which ye shall eat, the ox, the sheep, and the goat, the hart, and the roebuck, and the fallow deer, and the wild goat, and the pygarg, I don't know what that is, and the wild ox, and the chamois, chamois, and every beast that parteth the hoof, and cleaveth the cleft into two claws, and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that ye shall eat. Nevertheless, these ye shall not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the cloven hoof, as the camel, and the hare, and the coney, for they chew the cud, but divide not the hoof. Therefore they are unclean unto you. And the swine, because it divideth the hoof, yet cheweth not the cud, it is unclean unto you. Ye shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their dead carcass. These ye shall eat of all that are in the waters, all that have fins and scales shall ye eat, and whatsoever hath not fins and scales ye may not eat. It is unclean unto you. Of all clean birds ye shall eat, but these are they of which ye shall not eat, the eagle, and the ossifrage, and the osprey, and the glede, and the kite, and the vulture after his kind, and every raven after his kind, and the owl, and the nighthawk, and the cuckoo, and the hawk after his kind, the little owl, and the great owl, and the swan, and the pelican, and the gyre eagle, and the cormorant, and the stork, and the heron after her kind, and the lapwing, and the bat. And every creeping thing that flieth is unclean unto you. They shall not be eaten. But of all clean fowls ye may eat. Ye shall not eat of anything that dieth of itself. Thou shalt give it unto the stranger that is in thy gates, that he may eat it. Or thou mayest sell it unto an alien, for thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed, that the field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God, in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thy oil, and the firstlings of thy herd and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth, and thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. And the Levite that is within thy gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. At the end of 3 years thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come, and shall eat, and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hand which thou doest. Thus ends chapter 14. All right, so with 14, it is broken into 3 sections. The first is verses 1 and 2, directions concerning mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. And then after that, directions concerning clean and unclean meats, verses 3 through 21, and then concerning tithes in verse 29. So at verse 1, it has the phrase of the Lord, quote, "Ye are the children of the Lord your God. Ye shall not cut yourselves." When it says you're children of the Lord, whom therefore you must not disparage by unworthy or unbecoming practices. So if you're his child, you need to behave like it. You shall not cut yourselves, it said, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. So this was the practice of idolaters, both in worship of their idols, in their funerals, and upon occasion of public calamities. Is not this like a parent's charge to his little children playing with knives? Don't cut yourselves. This is the intention. This is the intention of those commands, which obliges us to deny ourselves. The meaning is, do yourselves no harm. And as this also is the design of cross providences, to remove from us those things by which we are in danger of doing ourselves harm. Man, I don't know about that, John Wesley. I mean, I'm sure the Lord, I don't know. Isn't the clear meaning here that one should not participate in cult rituals towards other gods? But here he expands it out just to say, yeah, okay, so worshiping other gods would do you harm, sure. All right, verse 3, the word abominable. Thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. Hebrew word is toeva. Something that's abominable is unclean and forbidden by the Lord, which therefore should be abominable to you. Verse 22, quote, all the increase. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. When it's talking about all the increase, this is to be understood of the second tithes, which seem to be the same with the tithes of the first year mentioned in verse 28. Verse 28 says, at the end of 3 years thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. Tithe literally means tenth in Hebrew, so regardless, the Hebrews were giving a tenth of their increase of their profit to the Lord. The clarity of verse 22 is lost on me. In verse 25, there's the phrase, in thine hand, then shalt thou turn it into money. This is under the situation where the place to offer it is too far. Then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. So whenever we're saying in thine hand, that is in a bag to be taken into thine hand and carried with thee. Yeah, in case someone is too literal and they're thinking you got to keep all your coins in your hands and you can't use a bag. Thank you for that, John Wesley. Verse 27, thou shalt not forsake him. The context, and the Levite that is within thy gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. When it says you shall not forsake him, you shall give him a share in such tithes or in the product of them. Fair enough. Okay, and then verse 28, at the end of 3 years, quote, at the end of 3 years thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shall lay it up within thy gates. That is, in the third year, as it is expressed in chapter 26, verse 12. Oh, we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so maybe this will make more sense then. When it says the same year, it means this is added to shew that he speaks of the third year and not of the fourth year, as some might conjecture from the phrase at the end of 3 years. So, okay, this should be illuminated more when we get to chapter 26. Very good. Okay, well, we've been together 55 minutes reading the Word and what John Wesley had to say about it. So, let's draw our time to a close, and we'll pick things back up tomorrow morning. I'll be here at 7:30 again. Very good. All right. God bless you guys. Have a good evening.